Well, good day to you. It is the last day of May 2025. We are nearly into June, headlong into halfway through this year. Can you believe it? My name is Gary Willing, and as always, I want to welcome you to Search for Signs. And as I always like to do, just take a brief moment. If you don't know about Maitreya and the Masters of Wisdom, if you're listening to this for the first time and you want to know more, if you want to see if there's truth to what I'm saying about Maitreya and the Masters of Wisdom, that the best thing to do is to do your own research, look into it, investigate it for yourself. You can do it however you want to do it, but I do recommend checking out some of the information on some of these websites that I provided links for in the description portion of these videos, such as at the very top, the Share International link. You can get the best background information there than you can anywhere else. You want to come back and join the discussion, post a comment, let me know what you think. Or if you have a question you want to ask me, post your question in the comment section or email me that question to searchforsigns@mail.com. And then rather than me just typing out your answer, in response, I respond and answer your questions by putting your questions and your answer in the next video. So look for it in the next video. All right. I want to dive on into it, but I want to start off with, I want to start off slow and then crescendo into what I really wanted to talk about. But Timothy Tilton comments all the time, and I appreciate his comments, just like I appreciate everybody's comments. And he's giving me some props on the short videos that I'm doing, the little excerpts from Benjamin Creme's Masters articles. And I hope you guys enjoy those. I found them to be really powerful with the music that I put in there. I'm not recording that music. I actually get it through a company called Premium Beat. And I did that because I pretty much, most movies that I watch, I judge harshly or not based on how well the music score is. So the better the music score, the more I probably like the music in the movie, and the more I find the movie to be memorable and I want to watch again. So I started trying to do this with music, and I found it to really work, and apparently it's working for Timothy. But he said, again, bravo, Gary, to your craftsmanship and long-suffering. Yes, it's a long-suffering ordeal for me to put these videos up because I keep making mistakes. And he said, keep the faith, and you guys keep the faith as well. But I wanted to talk about something just briefly before I get on into the video. And this is mainly for people who hear these videos and have listened to these videos for a long time. But at the beginning of all my Q&A videos, I always have that music going on. It's really dramatic, and it's a dent, 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 anyway. And then I have the images of the miracles, and then I also have it at the end. And they're kind of like the bookends of my video. And in the between the dramatic music is this long dribbling dross that I like to call my videos. I'm just kidding. But that music I got through the same company, Premium Beats. And a year or so ago, I was watching the Super Bowl. I think it wasn't the last one, but it was the one before that. And during one of the commercial breaks, I started to hear this music, and I didn't know where it was coming from. First, I wasn't really paying attention to it, because I hear that music every time I record a video and all that kind of stuff. And then I caught myself and I was like, where's that music coming from? I looked at my phone. It wasn't on my phone. It was actually coming through the speakers of my TV. There was a commercial during the Super Bowl that actually played that music. And I was like telling my whole family, oh my God, that's the same music I use from Search for Signs. And they didn't care, just like I'm sure you guys don't care that I brought it up. But I thought it was kind of interesting. But thank you very much for your props, Timothy, and I really appreciate it. And like I said, hopefully you guys are appreciating those little short videos. All right, now on to the next one. This is coming from Wild Humans, who also comments quite a bit, and I always appreciate their comments as well. UFOs, Maitreya, psychic abilities, miracles, masters of wisdom, and prophecy, ... I think Maitreya will have to deal with garnering attention from intelligence agencies, surveillance, gang stalking. He may have to deal with harassment and smear campaigns. They, and I'm editing this sentence, they can be pretty dirty. They can get pretty dirty and diabolical. It won't be an easy run. There are other people with their own kingdoms and private portfolios in mind. Well, thank you very much for that. And that is actually, of course, a natural concern. I am going to bring in some of the insights from Benjamin Creme's master on this subject, but I just want to say this. You're not far off. I mean, there will be smear campaigns and all sorts of things said about Maitreya when he's becoming more and more popular, for sure, right? It won't be ongoing forever, but at least initially, for the short to midterm, he'll have his detractors. And, if you look throughout history, of course, anyone that's put forth a new idea in whatever area of life they were working in have had their detractors, right? Anybody that stood for a possibility of humanity or the hope for humanity or for love even, have had their detractors and the violence and the rage perpetrated against them and all sorts of stuff, right? I mean, history is littered with those type of experiences from really the representatives of God. The disciples, men and women all throughout history who have done some kind of good have had their detractors. Now, other people have their detractors too, who aren't necessarily doing the work of the hierarchy, and because of who they are or how popular they are or whatever it happens to be. And we could talk about that in a different video. I just want to focus on those who are really doing the work of the masters. It just seems to be almost universal that there's always something said about them in a negative way, or the resistance and so forth and so forth. And of course, again, Maitreya will have his detractors and the resistance, and he probably already has people trying to keep him from getting out there and doing his work and so forth. But not to worry about them quite as much as the other part of this equation. And that is because as hard as it is for us to contemplate the world coming together and under the banner of peace in that kind of way, bringing about the principle of sharing, solving some of these problems in the world, and thinking that it's the institutions, it's the corruption, it's certain individuals who have their own vested interests that are against that, that's the real issue. That's the real problem. That's not the problem, actually. It is a problem, but it's not the real obstacle to all that. Or the biggest obstacle, let me put it like that. The biggest obstacle to peace, the biggest obstacle to these changes is the fear and the complacency within mankind, in humanity. That's the problem. The masters can overcome and tackle those other obstacles rather easily. Maitreya has a very thick skin. He's not going to get bothered when somebody's saying something bad about him. He'll still love them just as much as he loves anybody that's working toward his cause. And I'm going to read something where Benjamin Creme's master talks about that very point. But the real obstacle, the real lead weight on the progress of things is humanity itself and the inertia within humanity. The one thing that the lords of materiality do to counteract the work and activity of the forces of light is they keep humanity in fear. That's the biggest and most effective way of doing it. So what I wanted to bring into this conversation, wild humans, and for all of us to think about is the times that we've shared our fears with other people. What did it do? Well, according to the masters, we don't realize how far out even our thoughts go before they come back to us, for good or for ill. And when we spread fear, it's for ill. So when we spread fear to somebody, or we think fear, it goes out into the cosmos, does a lot of damage and harm, and then it comes right back to us in that way. And we have to deal with the repercussions of that. What we sow, so shall we reap. And what we sow, so shall we reap applies to what we think, as well as what we say, and also as what we do. It's not just what we do. And we've all spread fear throughout our lives. And when we do, we are literally aiding the forces of darkness when we do that. The other thing is, and this is the hopeful part of this message, is that hope and joy do the exact same thing. So when you think hope, when you feel hope and joy, it spreads out into the world in the same way. It infects people and affects people in the exact same way that fear does, but in the opposite way. It actually helps them. And it goes out into the cosmos, and we don't know how far it goes out until it comes right back to us. Instead of causing us ill and harm, it causes us good. So what we sow, so shall we reap, and we have within our hands, all of us do, the choice. Do we spread fear, or do we spread hope and joy? So that is the most important thing. We can't change the situation ourselves. We have no real way of doing that. But what we can do is change ourselves and what we do. And what we need to do is spread more hope and more joy and see how that infects other people. I am really oftentimes surprised when I talk to people, and I don't mean to do it, I don't think about doing it, but apparently I do from time to time, spread joy to people. And they come back and they tell me about conversations, and I've forgotten about it, right? So we don't know what we're doing. And then if I was spreading fear in that way and saying it and not realizing that I'm doing it, well, I could be having it I could be doing the same thing but in reverse. Does that make sense? So when humanity really starts to see Maitreya and listen to him, maybe not know who he is, because he's not claiming to be Maitreya until the day of declaration, but we'll start to kind of hear this person on TV and listen to him. And when he will never spread fear. It will always be joy and hope, right? He'll address the problems. He'll address just how dangerous those problems are, but share it in a way where it's hopeful, because he has complete conviction that we're going to get through this. Absolute faith in humanity that really none of us really have, right? But when we see him and we start to shed our fear of it, we'll see just how powerful we are as a people. And there's no corrupt government, there's no corrupt institution, there's no amount of wealth or money that somebody could be hoarding that and as powerful as those situations are when we have them, can withstand the people power. Just something to think about. But I do always appreciate your comments, wild humans. But anyway, what I wanted to read is 3 excerpts from Benjamin Creme's master's articles talking about kind of that same thing. And there are other examples of it in other articles, but I didn't get a chance to pull those out. But he says, whereas the great Lord seeks to invest each individual with sanctity and worth. He seeks to rid the world of violence and war. Where will he find his helpers? Who are ready to respond? Who have the courage to aid the Lord of love? He knows already on whom he can depend. Make ready to see him. Burnish bright your resolve. Be not dismayed by the immensity of the task. Be simple and heartfelt in all you do. That was the first thing I wanted to add, coming from Benjamin Creme's master, and that is from the article, The Entry of Maitreya. And then there's The Coming of the Great Lord, where he says, where is it? When Maitreya makes known his presence and role, they will find, to their astonishment, that he means them no harm. On the contrary, they will discover his love for those who fear and oppose him equals that for the multitudes who will welcome him with open hearts. They will find, too, that gradually their fear and dread will soften into a growing recognition of his divinity. Step by step, their doubts and fears will change into admiration and eventual trust, and his counsel and advice will they eagerly seek. So will it be. Pockets of opposition may persist for long, but in time, all but the most bigoted will accept him as teacher and friend. And then lastly, I got to find it. I'm going to read something from, if I had to pick an article that Benjamin Creme's master wrote as my favorite, it would be this one. It's The Son of Man. And he talks about, in this article, Maitreya's role for humanity, what he means really for humanity, and really who he is. Not as some omnipotent power come to judge the wicked and reward the faithful, but really as one of us who's shared all the experiences that we've all had. Not all the masters can claim that they've experienced every single thing that we've all are going through or have gone through. He is the one master that can claim that, because he's gone through every single part of our lives, the good and the bad, the painful and the pleasant. But at the very end of this wonderful article talking about Maitreya, he talks about his task, and this is what I wanted to say, and this really is in how he's going to counteract those very things that you're concerned about that will hold him up. You know what I mean? That hold the progress up. But it will also, but he says it in a very eloquent way, in a very symbolic way, but I also think in a very accurate way. That such a task is not an easy one, not even for the Son of Man, is clear. Ancient habits of division and separation have strong roots, while fear and superstition cast their spell over millions of mankind. But never before, in the history of the world, has a teacher come better equipped for his task. Maitreya has come to do battle with ignorance and fear, division and want. His weapons are spiritual understanding, knowledge, and love. His shining armor is truth itself. Anyway, again, Wild Humans, thank you very much for the comment. Okie dokie. Let's tackle some questions. What is the relationship between Jesus and Maitreya, Maitreya and the Buddha, and Muhammad and Maitreya? Will the different religions ever learn to get along? All right, well, thank you for the question. What is the relationship between Jesus and Maitreya can really only be explained by kind of talking a little bit about the relationship between the masters and humanity. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Well, there was a time eons ago when humanity all knew who these masters were. We knew who they were. We looked up to them as our elder brothers. We weren't nearly as advanced as we are today, which we're not really that advanced as a humanity as a whole, but we're way more advanced than we were back then. And this was during the time of Lemuria and Atlantis. So for millions of years, these masters worked out openly in the world, like I said, and known who they were, and for who and what they were. Anyway, there was an event that happened about 100,000 years ago, and there was this huge, I guess, global battle between the forces of light and the forces of darkness. And it resurfaced again during the time of World War I and World War II. And it's directly related to that time. It's also directly related to what John was talking about in the Bible as the Antichrist, not as an individual that people were looking for, but as an energy. So there's a relationship between what happened then and those two things. But during that time, humanity was equally influenced by the forces of light and the forces of darkness. And this battle resulted in the destruction of Atlantis, and it resulted in a stalemate between those two very powerful forces on our planet, the forces of light and the forces of darkness. And they agreed to, for a time, not influence humanity directly. So the forces of darkness retreated away from humanity, out of the everyday world in that way, and so did the forces of light, the Masters of Wisdom. And the Masters of Wisdom went into very, very, very remote parts of the planet. So remote that it could be said that it would be literally impossible for anybody to just stumble across where they were. So they didn't just go into a small patch of woods, which would eventually have to move because there was construction. And I guarantee you, when Maitreya was living in his abode, 17,500 feet up, he probably would have had to travel a very long way to get to the nearest McDonald's. So very far away from humanity and their eyes of humanity. And they could be found unless they wanted to be found by somebody. So they moved into, of course, the Himalayas. A lot of them lived up in there and still are there to this day. Some are moved into the Rockies and the Andes Mountains, Urals, Carpathian Mountains, and then, of course, some of the deserts like the Sahara and the Gobi Deserts and so forth. And so for eons, they were living away from humanity in that way. Still here, still guiding and protecting and stimulating humanity, but indirectly. And the way that they did it indirectly was through the disciples in the world. And this is where Jesus comes into the picture. Is all throughout history, there have been men and women who have helped humanity progress. Now, for the most part, these men and women who have done that did not know that they were working as a part of a coordinated group behind the scenes known as the hierarchy of masters or the Masters of Wisdom. They didn't know about them either. They were just inspired to do something. That inspiration always came from a higher source, which was the Masters of Wisdom, but from their point of view, it was just coming from within inside of them. So that's why they didn't speak about the masters, speak about it being an inspiration coming from a higher source in that way. They just talked about something or did something or whatever it was. And it could be in any field. It could be in music and arts to politics or spirituality or religion to the social field or whatever, medical or technological field. So it could be anything, but whatever they did to help humanity progress, they were unknowingly or knowingly working with these masters. Now, from time to time, and that time to time is about every 2,000 or so years, as our solar system moves out of alignment from one constellation to another, there was an opening for a disciple of disciples, man among men, kind of deal, to come really into the world to teach humanity and give humanity a set of teachings to help it out for the next age. So Jesus, of course, was a world teacher, but at the time when he was in Palestine, he was just a disciple. Now he's one of the masters of wisdom himself. But Muhammad was the same way. Gautama Buddha was also a world teacher. Krishna was also a world teacher. So there wasn't mass communication, of course, so there had to be different world teachers around different times and those kind of things, but they were all kind of really head and shoulders above an average disciple. So Jesus was extraordinary. The Gautama Buddha was extraordinary. Muhammad was an extraordinary disciple. Same thing with Krishna, extraordinary disciple. And so their teachings, even to this day, live on. They're very distorted based on what they had said originally, but the essence of the truth of what they said is still there. So to focus in on Jesus, because that's your question, the relationship between Maitreya and Jesus was when Jesus was in Palestine, he was just a disciple. He was the world teacher for that age. He was consciously working with one of the masters who happened to be Maitreya, and Maitreya worked through him in the same way that the Buddha worked through the Gautama Buddha. And Jesus, when he became a master, worked through Muhammad. But the teachings that Jesus gave predominantly came from Maitreya. I know that would seem blasphemous to most Christians who see Jesus as their God, but esoterically, that's what happened. The people that saw Jesus at that time did not know that he was receiving messages telepathically from someone in the Himalayas. They didn't even know what the Himalayas were. What I'm saying? They just knew about their little corner of the world, that kind of thing. But Jesus did let on to and did tell three of his closest disciples, Peter, James, and John, that that's what was going on. They knew about it, but even the other disciples didn't know precisely what was what was happening. But Jesus, let me go back to the Buddha, excuse me. The Buddha is a Christ, just as Maitreya is a Christ. But they're really on two sides of the same energy. So the Buddha embodies the wisdom aspect of God, where Maitreya embodies the love aspect. It doesn't mean that the Buddha can't love, and it doesn't mean that Maitreya doesn't have wisdom. It just means that they are embodying that energy differently. But it's the first time that really, I don't know if it's ever happened before, where a planet on this level, which we're not really that advanced of a planet, has had a Christ present. So, and that happened when the Buddha became a Christ. And then Maitreya became a Christ. So we have two. Now, ideologically, they seem different, right, to people. I would say more Buddhists are accepting of the teachings of Jesus than really the average Christian would be a Buddha. But they're really coming from the same source. And we're doubly blessed that we actually have two Christ. I don't know if it's ever happened, but it's extremely, extremely rare that we would even have one Christ, let alone two. So, but when the Buddha worked through the Prince Gautama, because he was a part of our humanity, that was the first time in human history on this planet that wisdom was present and manifest perfectly. That's the first time. Won't be the last time, but it's the first time. And then when Jesus was around in Palestine, and Maitreya worked through him, because Jesus was just a disciple of humanity at that time, or disciple of one of these masters, but he was a part of our humanity, that was the first time that love was in its perfection in humanity for the first time. Not the last time, but the first time. And so Jesus' role at that time was to to really give the preliminary teaching about how to love. A little bit of the teachings of the laws of life, just as the Buddha gave a little bit of the teachings of the laws of life. And these masters will eventually elaborate on what they were trying to give humanity at that time. But for Jesus to do what he did, I mean, it's just extraordinary what he did. And even then, Jesus said, greater things than this shall you do yourself. So that's the destiny of all of us, of humanity, is to love as Jesus loved, to have the wisdom that the Buddha had and everything. But we might not embody it the way that Maitreya and the Buddha do, but we'll be able to manifest it perfectly as every one of these masters do. But that's the relationship and role of Maitreya and the Buddha, and they work together hand in hand, moment to moment. Jesus' role in relationship with Maitreya now, according to Ben's master, is they're very, very close, and they work hand in hand too, in that way, moment to moment. In fact, according to Ben, you hardly ever see them not working together. So, in fact, if you go to the Share International site and you read some of the personal experiences that people have had with some of these masters, there are so many of them where the two of them were together. And when Benjamin Crème used to give his lectures, someone would always ask, was Maitreya at the lecture? And so many times it was the Master Jesus and Maitreya were at that lecture. Or at this march, there was the Master Jesus and Maitreya together. I oftentimes talk about this one video where Maitreya was speaking to people at this peace rally in Hyde Park about 20 or so years ago. The Master Jesus was right next to him. So they work together all the time, moment to moment, and they will long into the future work together in that way. So that's their role. But the role of Maitreya to Muhammad, I'm sure is pretty close too, but the role that Jesus had with Muhammad is, I guess, also important to talk about, because when Jesus became a master, after he was crucified as Jesus, he reincarnated again as Apollonius of Tyana, then took the fifth initiation and became a master. And at some point, he worked through Muhammad, who was a disciple. Now Muhammad's a master, but at that time he was just a disciple. So the teachings of Islam are really coming from Jesus, in the same way that the teachings of Jesus were coming from Maitreya. They're all coming from the central truth, but those individual masters work through those disciples to give those teachings out in that way. Jesus' role in the future, according to the Master DK, will be to help the churches discover the truth of their own teachings, to help clean up some of the distortions that we've started to believe is true, but aren't true in the teachings of the Bible and the teachings of the Quran and that kind of thing. So Jesus will be for the whole world just as Maitreya is for the whole world, but his role will mainly be for the churches and heading up the churches in that way. So hopefully that helps. And then in terms of will the different religions ever learn to get along, religions and the way that it is today are examples actually of unity in diversity. We don't look at it like that. We look at it as our way is the best way and the only true way, and everyone else has gotten it wrong. But really, that's because we suffer from isms, which Maitreya says isms are like drugs. They keep us from seeing the truth. But the truth is that each religion has a truth within it. Each religion is coming from the same source. Everyone who's practicing those religions are trying to discover the same truth, but in a different way from another group. But they are examples of unity and diversity. Nation states are examples of unity and diversity. Each nation is diverse. Each nation has a right to be unique and is unique. And I know this is going to be hard for an American to hear, but America is not the best country out there. Just saying. So it is a country, and it's a wonderful country. And I love it in the United States, but it's not any better than Mexico or Canada, and it shouldn't be treating these other countries like they're inferior, like they like to do. The peoples of Mexico have a right to govern themselves just as the way that the United States has a right to govern itself, or France or Cuba or Venezuela or the Sudan or whatever. They all have something to give to the world. And so we should start looking at each country as diverse. And when we do, we will realize true peace in that way. And that will only come through trust and through the principle of sharing. But we'll eventually see that nations are examples of unity and diversity. Political parties are really an example of unity in diversity, because we see them now as the one and only way to do things. But in actuality, the left have got some things right and the right have got some things right. And we need to look to working together. I know it seems kind of utopian, but eventually we'll see that each side has something to offer, and we have to work and be more cooperative. And that's the whole point. So the energies of Pisces, which is the age that is now kind of coming to an end, Jesus was the world teacher for that age. In this coming age, Maitreya himself, and not a disciple, will be the world teacher for this age. But the energies of Aquarius will eventually give to humanity cooperation, synthesis, brotherhood, unity in diversity. And that's what we're starting to get the idea of unity and diversity. In 2,000 years, it will be a reality. It will be a no-brainer for humanity to look at each other like that. Right now, they're just concepts, right? Hopefully that helps, and hopefully that answers some of your questions and concerns and so forth. I love you guys. Thank you very much for the questions and the answers and the questions and the comments, and thank you for listening to my answers and my responses. You guys have a wonderful rest of your weekend, and I look forward to putting up a video in the very near future. You take care. Remember to take action and help SOP save our planet. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to talking to you in future videos.